Great. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the last day of our 15th International Disability Law Summer School. So as is traditional, we're having our moot court exercise this morning. Oh, are you okay? Okay. And I'm just going to, for our audience, share a little bit about the fact scenario that we'll be debating this morning, as well as sharing a little bit about the running order. Okay. So this is the fictional scenario that we have developed for this year's moot. It involves a disabled woman called Deborah Baddy, who was elected to the National Parliament of our fictional country, Florin, in 2021. This development was heralded as a progressive achievement for the opposition party, of which she is a member, as she was the first disabled woman elected to Parliament. Once elected, Deborah made the following access requests to the head of buildings at the National Parliament. She wanted menstrual products to be available in all accessible bathrooms in Parliament buildings, to be allocated an accessible office on the ground floor near an accessible bathroom with step-free access to the parliamentary chamber, and an accessible seat within her party's voting block in the chamber. These requests were partially met. While menstrual products were initially installed in the accessible bathrooms, these were not regularly restocked, and on several occasions in the first year of Deborah's term, she found they were not available. Deborah was allocated an office on the ground floor, but it was a 10-minute walk to the nearest accessible bathroom. It took 4 months for the building department to refurbish the chamber to create an accessible seat. During this time, Ms. Baddy was permitted to cast her vote from her office in the Parliament building instead of in the chamber. While COVID-19 restrictions were in place in Florin in 2021 and early 2022, parliamentarians still cast their votes in the Parliament, either from their offices in the Parliament building or in the chamber. Numbers in the chamber at any one time were limited to reduce the risk of infection, and parliamentarians were requested to mask and were spaced at least 2 metres apart from each other in the chamber. At times, this meant votes took longer than usual, as parliamentarians who wished to cast their vote in the chamber had to wait for the previous group of members to exit the chamber before they could enter to cast their vote. In 2022, Deborah became pregnant with her first child. Parliamentarians in Florin are entitled to 6 months maternity leave, but Deborah requested and was granted an additional 3 months of leave as she needed a longer recovery period due to the impact that the birth had on her existing disabilities. When she returned from leave, Deborah made the following access request to Parliament: a fridge to be installed in her office for storing pumped breast milk, remote access from her home office to parliamentary votes on occasion. Ms. Baddy explained that due to the nature of her disabilities following the birth of her child, she would sometimes not be able to travel to Parliament, but would still wish to participate in parliamentary debates and votes as she was elected to do. The Buildings Department stated Ms. Baddy was permitted to have a fridge in her office, but she would need to purchase it herself. A breastfeeding and pumping room containing a fridge was available in Parliament buildings. However, this was up a flight of stairs in an older part of the building with no access by elevator. Her request for remote access to the parliamentary debates and voting from home was denied. The legislation on parliamentary procedure in Florin clearly stated that all those voting must do so on the grounds of Parliament. They could vote from their offices within the parliamentary buildings, but not from a home office located outside the parliamentary grounds. In the past, informal arrangements had sometimes been made to accommodate parliamentarians who could not be present for an important vote, such as vote pairing, where a member of the opposing political party would agree to abstain to compensate for a particular legislator who was unable to attend the vote. However, Ms. Baddy was unable to obtain a pairing agreement for the votes she was unable to attend. She also did not have a vote pairing arrangement in place during her maternity leave. Ms. Baddy took a discrimination case against the Parliament in October 2023 for these failures to reasonably accommodate her. The judge held that Parliament had made reasonable efforts to meet her needs, and therefore that no discrimination on grounds of disability or gender had occurred. In particular, the judge noted that the Parliament was, at the time the case was taken, undergoing a disability access audit of all its buildings and infrastructure with a view to introducing further improvements. She held that the law on parliamentary procedure could only be changed by the legislature, and that the existing law did not violate any of Ms. Badi's equality rights. She noted that the Minister for Justice had just recently convened a task force to review current parliamentary rules and procedures from a human rights and equality perspective. As a member of a small opposition party, Ms. Badi has drafted her own bill to change the parliamentary procedures, but this bill does not currently have the support of government, and so it cannot pass in the Florin Parliament. Having exhausted domestic remedies, Ms. Badi is now bringing her case before the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, where she is alleging violations of her rights under Articles 5, 6, 9 and 29. So this morning we will hear first from the complainants team that is representing Ms. Badi. They will have 15 minutes to present their opening arguments. During this time, there may be objections from the other team and also questions from the judges. When that occurs, we will stop the clock and restart it once the judges are satisfied. Then we will hear the opening statement from the state team of the Government of Florin. The same rules apply. And also after that, we will hear an opening statement from the National Human Rights Institution of Florin for 10 minutes. And again, the same rules apply. After those opening statements, the two main teams, the state and the complainant, starting with the complainant, will have 10 minutes rebuttal time to address the arguments made by the other side. Again, objections can be made during this time and questions can be asked by the judges. Similarly, for the state team responding in the rebuttal, 10 minutes with questions and objections permitted. And finally, then, we will have closing statement from all three teams, starting with the complainants team, for 1 minute, during which time no questions or objections may be made. And the same rule applies to the state team, and the same rule applies to the 1 minute closing statement of the National Human Rights Institution. So with that, I'm going to hand over to our participants to formally, and we'll start with the complainants team, to commence the moot court.
Is my mic on? Can everyone hear me? All right, cool. Hi, my name is Maggie Knisley. I'm representing the plaintiff, Ms. Deborah Badi, a member of the Florin National Parliament. We're good? I'm Maggie Knisley. I'm representing the plaintiff, Ms. Deborah Badi, a member of the Florin National Parliament since 2021. Ms. Badi is the first disabled woman elected to this parliament and provides a new paradigm for Florin and its culture to include and promote women and those with disabilities into positions of power and titles of influence. My client was denied the following access requests by the head of buildings at the Florin National Parliament: menstrual products being available in all accessible bathrooms in Parliament buildings, being allocated an accessible office on the ground floor near an accessible bathroom with step-free access to the parliamentary chamber, and an accessible seat within our party's voting block in the chamber. These issues not only impact women, but also affect the access and participation of future parliamentary members, current members with developing disabilities, and anyone who might experience mobility loss, permanent or temporary injuries, or invisible disabilities such as PTSD or depression. While these requests on behalf of my client were partially met, they're in violation of her rights under Articles 5, 6, 9, and 29 of the CRPD. We're here today to fully understand the definitions of discrimination and disability under the CRPD and put the choice of ignorance on trial. Under Article 2 of the CRPD, discrimination is defined as any distinction, exclusion, or restriction on the basis of disability which has the purpose or effect of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal basis with others of all human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. It includes all forms of discrimination, including denial of reasonable accommodation or universal design. This case highlights the hypocritical acts performed by the government of Florin by having ratified both the CRPD and the optional protocol to the CRPD. The grounds of discrimination are at the intersection of disability and gender. Here's a brief but shocking overview of the access denied to my client. Menstrual products. One access requirement that was partially met, but not wholly, was for the Parliament of Florence to provide menstrual products in all accessible bathrooms in Parliament buildings. I want to note that in Section 3.2 of Florence Equal Opportunities Act, it notes that a refusal or failure to provide the special treatment or facilities mentioned in this act is unreasonable, and it would only cause a small cost to the service provider. Other members of Parliament do not have to request special access to necessities. Simply put, women and non-gender conforming persons should not have to bring their own menstrual products if no one else has to bring their own toilet paper. A fridge installed in her office. There is a constant struggle for my client and many women before her to have access to a fridge for storing pumped breast milk. Under Article 2 of the CRPD, reasonable accommodation means necessary and appropriate modification and adjustments to ensure to persons with disabilities the enjoyment or exercise on an equal basis with others of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. My client and I are not asking for a specific brand of fridge, a specific size, but just a reasonable accommodation. If the fridge in the general room in a parliamentary building needs repairing or is broken down, is the Parliament also going to claim that it's too expensive to fix or too much of a burden? Article 22 of the CRPD states that unlawful interference with his or her privacy and family. By denying this fridge, you're denying access of the child by extension. The provision for breastfeeding is in the interest of the child, not only my client. In Article 6, Women with Disabilities, Section 2, in the CRPD, it states that states parties shall take all appropriate measures to ensure the full development, advancement, and empowerment of women. This is fundamental, paramount, and urgent. Florence National Parliament and my client agrees that gendered ground is discriminatory grounds, as stated in Florence Equal Opportunities Act in Section 2(1)(a). According to an article posted on the official website of the European Union during March 2023, EU women hold about 1/3 of the seats in national parliaments. Women held 32.7% of all seats in national parliaments across the EU, compared to the world average of 26.4%. Globally, only 3 countries had a majority of women in their parliaments: Rwanda, Cuba, and Nicaragua. On the other end of the spectrum, 3 countries had no women in their parliaments: Papua New Guinea, Ventawu, and Yemen. If men typically hold the majority in all parliament seats, we should equally expect and prepare for women to do the same. So when 50 to 100% of Florence Parliament members are women, I fear that Florence reasonable efforts and disability audits will need a comprehensive overhaul to ensure their accuracy and effectiveness. Accessible office and accessible seating in the chamber for my client is also a struggle. The CRPD states in Article 9 that measures taken to ensure persons with disabilities access includes the identification of the elimination of obstacles and barriers. It is not up for debate who needs access. The validity and relevance of my client's needs is not up for debate. It's not up for vote. The value that my client holds in Parliament and in her vote is to be taken with gravity, attention, and seriousness. Remote voting access. In accordance with the CRPD Article 29(a)(2), it is crucial to protect the rights of persons with disabilities by vote to secret ballot in elections.
Excuse me, Councillor. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Just before you start that argument, I just thought I would ask a couple questions about the legal arguments you've made thus far. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So in regards to both the reasonable accommodation requests regarding the chair, I think it's what it's, and the fridge, I think you've made some good arguments there around why your client needs them. And what I would like you to respond to, and I suspect this might be something that's brought up by your colleagues, is how to ensure that it won't be an undue burden if every member of parliament begins to ask for the things that might meet their individual needs. Should we provide a mini fridge for beer when different members of parliament would like a mini fridge for beer? Or if there's desires to have different colors of chairs or different styles. Can you respond to that in terms of perhaps just the requests of your client wouldn't be an undue burden, but if all of the members of parliament started asking for something similar, I could see that this could become an undue burden. Could you respond to that?
Yeah, of course. So what you're referring to, people's preferences, my client's not asking for these requests out of preference or style. She's asking them out of need. So these aren't things that are optional for her. And it's to help her, one, be most productive in her job. So it would be denying her access to fully participate in her job. And she isn't asking to color her room walls any differently or office decorations, but these are necessary accommodations for her children and also how she functions as a woman with a disability. Do you guys have anything to say?
Yes, these requests might be individual measures right now, but a reasonable accommodation can become an accessibility issue, and that I mean a positive measure, a group-oriented provision as required by Article 9 of CRPD, and therefore it may be an individual measure right now, but it'll become in the long run, not a financial burden on the state by providing this individual measure now and with the aim of it becoming a positive measure, proactive for future candidates with or without disabilities that may need that fridge in the future. This fridge is a temporary measure for this new mother, and it might be a backup fridge either for the main one or also for a future mother to be as a parliamentary member.
Thanks so much. Okay, so your argument is that at the moment, this is an individual accessibility need based on the gender and disability of your client. And if any other members of parliament have needs that aren't just preferences, if they're also based on a protected class like disability or gender or another marginalized group, then similarly, the parliament should address those needs in a similar way, and that addressing them may lead on to let's say, alleviating the financial burden because it will address systemic accessibility needs as well. Is that correct?
Yes, but we have to remember also this historic deprivation of our rights of our client as a disabled person, and we have to think of what this means not just to our client individually, but also to the general community of people with disabilities. And by adjusting and constantly applying accommodations, it will only ensure in the long run the full participation of many people with different hats and different needs in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
Remote voting access for my client. In accordance with the CRPD Article 29A2, it is crucial to protect the rights of persons with disabilities to vote by secret ballot in elections and public referendums without intimidation. This includes the right to stand for elections, effectively hold office, and perform all public functions at all levels of government. Facilitating the use of assistive and new technologies where appropriate. We are denying the people who voted for my client into Parliament their right to be represented through her vote and have their voice heard when my client can't vote in the chamber, in her office, or outside or in the confines of her home. The facts of this case are straightforward. We only need to hear them. An argument for the technological accommodations for my client. The advancements in technology that have been made due to the COVID-19 pandemic have allowed our friends of the court to participate via Zoom today. It's not a matter of subjective discretion when and where these accommodations can be utilized. Denying access to those technological accommodations is inappropriate, especially when the infrastructure for remote access has been successfully established and utilized in our recent past. My client was denied several essential access requests by the head of buildings at the Florida National Parliament. These included the provision of menstrual products in all accessible bathrooms, allocation of an accessible office.
Just before you get on to that, I want to ask you, is this working? I want to ask you a question just about remote voting. There would have to be some limit on voting outside the precinct of a parliament. You know, given the nature of parliamentary voting, the requirement of discipline in parliamentary voting, the whip system, government could have a minority position, the risk of corruption, I mean, very real risk of corruption of the voting system. So what, if reasonableness is a two-way concept, what reasonable restrictions would you suggest are okay in relation to remote voting? Or do you see it as just something that must be granted as a matter of principle?
Can answer. So what the complainant is requesting is not the possibility for everyone to vote from home, but only for persons who do not have the access to parliament due to disability or due to gender-specific issues. And with regards to safeguards of the voting procedure, we also have seen during COVID-19 that there have been many states which have been implementing online hearings. So court hearings have been taking place online. And as well as that, it is also the issue that members of parliament also do have to take an oath, and they are obliged to represent what their parties were stating, and they're obliged to do what their parties represent and what the voters gave them the power to do. So this would be another aspect which could be useful as a safeguard with regard to security issues. However, voting from home should only be implemented in case it is deemed really necessary, so not to everyone. Thank you for your question.
The provision of menstrual products in all accessible bathrooms, allocation of an accessible office on the ground floor near an accessible bathroom with step-free access to the parliamentary chamber, and an accessible seat within her party's voting block. Although some of Ms. Boddy's requests were partially met, these denials violate her rights under Articles 5, 6, 9, and 29 of the CRPD. The true issue I should be speaking on is the need of immediate change in our cruel and unjust culture. My client and I are uninterested in what is pretty or convenient and fighting for what will make others' lives bloom. People with disabilities are allowed to respond to threats to their accessibility in powerful ways. The conversation needs to change from, why do they deserve special treatment, to, why don't I help change the world? The community of people with disabilities are discomposed by partial fulfillments of the Florian Parliament and prepared to create a world that not only meets the bare minimum of inclusion, but celebrates the joy through freedom, access, and justice. Thank you for your time and consideration.
We did it.
Okay, we call now on the state's representatives to commence.
Madam Chair and esteemed committee members, my name is Alana Murray and I'm here with my colleagues Kylie, Grace and Christina, representing the state of Florida in these proceedings. We would like to respectfully submit that the arguments put forward today do not reflect the position of the state of Florida. And I do say that we have fulfilled our obligations under Article 5, 6, 9 and 29. I will endeavour to take each article in turn. However, it is important to note that there is potential for my arguments to overlap. This is because often the answers explain our commitments across multiple articles. The duty to provide accommodation in accordance with Articles 2 and 5 of the Convention can be broken down into two constituent parts under General Comment number 6. The first part imposes a positive legal obligation to provide reasonable accommodation, which is a modification or adjustment that is both necessary and appropriate, where it is required in a particular case to ensure that a person with a disability can enjoy or exercise his or her rights. The second part, and I would emphasise this, of this duty ensures that those required accommodations do not impose a disproportionate or undue burden on the duty bearer. On the accessible office issue, the state contends that the office provided was indeed the nearest available office that fit with the measures requested by Ms. Badi. To facilitate closer proximity to an accessible bathroom, we would have had to evict an existing parliamentarian from their office. This would lead to an unreasonable burden upon us, as well as creating confusion and loss of productivity among clerical staff and others within Parliament. Therefore, we respectfully submit that the walk of 10 minutes on the ground floor was within reasonable bounds.
Sorry, just to interject there. Could you, perhaps you're going to do this, but could you outline exactly in what way it's an unreasonable burden? Is it financial implications? Is there legal barriers in terms of a historic building, or what is the exact burden? And even if it's pretend, numeric value would be useful in terms of making our decision, I think.
Sorry, can you repeat the last part?
Numeric value of the burden would be useful in terms of making our decision.
So obviously it is difficult to, I suppose, quantify the loss of productivity and what that means for Parliament. What we hope from all of our parliamentary processes is that they happen efficiently. So the idea of moving a parliamentarian would impact whether it's meetings, constituents coming to visit, possible other disabled people who already know where their specific representative is. And it actually has the potential to create an access barrier for other disabled people who would know the route.
Okay, thank you very much.
On that question as well. I mean, you say it has the potential to create an access barrier, but that's an imagined potential, whereas we actually know of an access barrier that can be dealt with. And your working assumption seems to be that in the application of the disproportionate or undue burden criterion, that we can't ask others to accommodate who might well be willing to accommodate. So in a sense, your working assumption is negative. You know, it presumes the worst of other parliamentarians. What have you got to say to that? Anyone? Yeah, sorry.
Okay. I think as someone who works in Parliament, I agree. It is always our assumption that parliamentarians would not concede to the access because they don't actually know that it is an access barrier. They just see it as us moving them. So we do definitely have to work on our culture within the Parliament, but that is through the work that we're currently doing, which I will outline, that we will hopefully, we will do that. Can I keep going?
Thanks very much.
While we do concede that it is not ideal that it took 4 months for the retrofitting of chambers, we respectfully submit that by allowing Ms. Badi to vote in her office, something which at the time had not been done en masse, that she did not face discrimination as she was not actually prevented from doing her job. This did not in any way restrict her duties and her access to voting as part of her work, just the method in which it was done. In hindsight, Ms. Badi's experience actually proved useful as a proof of concept exercise when we were faced with the COVID-19 pandemic. It was because Miss Body had paved the way that we knew in-office voting would work, and we thank her for her leadership. Moving on to the issues post Miss Body's pregnancy and the issue of the fridge. We respectfully submit that we did not actually prevent Miss Body from acquiring the fridge and actually permitted the fridge, just not at the expense of the state. Section 3.2 of Florence Equal Opportunity Act states a refusal or failure to provide special treatment or facilities to which this act refers shall not be deemed reasonable if such provision would give rise to a cost other than a nominal cost to the provider of the service in question. In our view, the issue of the fridge is more than a nominal cost. While on the
Can I
plate,
just check with you with regard to the fridge that is provided elsewhere. Was that provided from state expenditure?
it is not in the fact pattern, so I am unsure.
It just appeared the fridge for pumping purposes and the storage of milk that is in an inaccessible space that just exists. Okay.
I will actually go on to address that particular issue.
Okay. Thank you.
So the fridge is more than a nominal cost. We already pay for we have agreed to pay for the electricity, the upkeep, the maintenance, but the cost of the fridge itself is what pushes it from over a nominal cost. There is additionally the consideration that if we were to provide the cost for Miss Body's fridge, that it would set a precedent for other parliamentarians not of Miss Body's circumstances to argue that they are also entitled to request the fridge. Before this committee in Fiona Gibbon versus Australia, the state argued that it falls within its broad discretion to decide how to allocate limited resources. Therefore, we submit that it is not reasonable. Finally, the request to vote from home. In section 38.2 of our parliamentary procedures, it states a rule of personal presence shall apply to all votes in the Parliament of Florin, requiring members of Parliament to be present in person in the Parliament at the time of the vote. Therefore, all parliamentarians are subject to the same rules. This can be justified by security. By allowing votes to happen off parliamentary grounds with a domestic Wi-Fi connection, it opens us up to potential online attacks and other security breaches. Therefore, and ultimately, we must balance our obligations under the UN CRPD with our obligations to the nation. Therefore, we respectfully submit that for the reason of national security, that it would not be possible to accommodate this request. Now on to the topic of Article 6. Under Article 6.
Sorry, before you
Yes.
move on, I thought I would just ask, I know that you're concerned, you've expressed your concern about complying with the CRPD. And in the space of political participation, I feel like all governments should be particularly concerned. And I think, I don't want to challenge you too much beyond the parameters of what we've been given here. But I wonder if you could just speak for a moment about sort of the importance of voice and of legal agency and political participation and what that means to you as a government. I think that would definitely help us in making this decision to have a little bit more background of how important those issues are to you and what potential actions you may take in future in those spaces.
Absolutely. So obviously the voice of everyone is important to us, particularly, I suppose, Article 6, women and girls with disabilities is very important to us. That is why we have, I suppose, permitted in-office voting. So it's still on parliamentary grounds. So it still falls in Parliament and under our in-person rules. while not having to be in actual chambers. This promotes wider accessibility. So I suppose in terms of our own obligations and our own ambitions for women and girls and all disabled people, we want to ensure that the chair in the vote or block issue is not a barrier for anyone else. We want to ensure that the office that people are elected to, that they can vote from that office and still be part of the parliamentary grouping and still do the job that they have been elected to do.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Or if you had more to add. Yeah.
I was just going to add, you asked about the importance of having voice within our parliament. And one of the beauties of that is the ability for all of our citizens to be able to vote. They elect who they want to be sharing their voice within our government. And we're providing the opportunity for everyone to share that voice. And then it's upon then the elected official to use their voice in the way that they were elected to do so. And we're doing everything we can to provide every reasonable measure to allow that opportunity for everyone to share their voice that they were elected to do.
But surely if you are wanting to guarantee the right of everybody to vote, those voters should have the same expectations that their elected officials can participate equally in all ways in the parliament to which they are elected to.
Correct, which is why we've provided the opportunity to vote from her office on Parliament grounds. However, again, it's a breach of security to provide that opportunity at home. So we're still allowing as many votes to be cast as possible with the same amount of voices being heard, just in a way that protects both the government as well as the individual.
Objection, Your Honour. Presumption of language.
Do you want to
Would you like to, do you want to expand briefly further?
Yeah, it's assuming that every member that is voted has an etiquette that they sign into preserving the security of the parliament and all their etiquette rules. And by voting at home or providing accessibility to enable exactly the vote of the electoral through the TD member or our client, to assume that she is going to break those etiquette rules as a member in order, because she will vote elsewhere, in order to also fulfill her duty as a representative.
I'm overruling that. No.
Could I just, but building on the bad faith suggestion, is the state suggesting that the complainant is choosing to disenfranchise the people who voted for her by being unreasonable on access? Is that actually what you're saying?
No. That is a complete misinterpretation, actually, of what we are saying. What we are saying is that all parliamentarians are subject to the same rules. We're saying that nobody can vote from home. It is not by virtue of Ms. Body's disability that she cannot vote from home. It is by virtue of her elected position that she cannot vote from home. So under Article 6.2, state parties shall take all appropriate measures to ensure the full development, advancement, and empowerment of women for the purpose of guaranteeing them the exercise and enjoyment of the human rights and fundamental freedoms set out in the present convention. UN General Comment 6 says, in order to advance and empower women with disabilities, measures must go beyond the goal of development and also aim at improving the situation for women with disabilities throughout their lifespan. Apologies. We submit that we've done that. Ms. Body states that there were several occasions that the menstrual products were not available. This implies, inter alia, that there were several occasions where they were available. Addressing all barriers that prevent or restrict participation of women with disabilities and ensuring that women with disabilities, as well as the views and opinions of girls with disabilities, through the representative organisations are included in the design, implementation and monitoring of all programmes that have an impact on their lives. That's from general comment number 3. Our commitment to supporting disabled women and girls goes beyond our statutory obligations. We took the decision based on Ms. Boddy's request, as well as our own commitments, to grant additional maternity leave to allow her to heal and bond with her child. It is regrettable that the provided pumping room is inaccessible. However, it is important to note that we are actively working to rectify and remedy this. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has delayed all processes which would normally be conducted. In order to promote the safest possible audit, we were limited to restrictions. The audit is ongoing and we are committed to learning and providing the best opportunity to women and girls with disabilities to not only succeed, but thrive. In relation to the voter pairing agreement, we respectfully submit that it is not a valid argument to state that this falls under the UN CRPD. It is not within the remit of the state to organise voter pairing arrangements. With that said, because of this issue arising with Ms. Boddy, we have convened a task force to ensure that this does not happen again and that our processes are consistently improving. While this is of little comfort, the issues that Ms. Boddy faced relating to the pumping room, coupled with the voter pairing, have meant that our eyes are open to these issues. It is through Ms. Boddy's experiences that we can learn and continue to be proactive. We submit that this also applies to our Article 9 obligations. Under Article 9, our obligations are to take appropriate measures to ensure to persons with disabilities access on an equal basis with others, and that these measures, which shall include the identification and elimination of obstacles and barriers to accessibility. The seating, while delayed, is built. The audit is ongoing. The fridge has been permitted. The menstrual products provided. On a national security basis, we cannot unfortunately sanction voting from home, but that is not because of Ms. Boddy's disability. That is the same for all parliamentarians. For equality to exist, it must not be mandated to perform specific measures, as that would infringe on our sovereignty and state decision-making power. Progress is happening, not at the pace that we would like, but at a reasonable pace as allowed by our available resources. Under Article 29, to ensure that persons with disabilities can effectively and fully participate in political and public life on an equal basis with others, directly or through freely chosen representatives, including the right and opportunity for persons with disabilities to vote and be elected, inter alia by ensuring the voting procedures, facilities and materials are appropriate, accessible and easy to understand and use. We submit that by convening our task force relating to our voting procedures and how we can be more equal, that we have done and continue to do everything reasonable to accommodate Ms. Boddy. Protecting the right of persons with disabilities to vote by secret ballot in elections and public referendums without intimidation, and to stand for elections, to effectively hold office and perform all public functions at all levels of government, facilitating the use of assistive and new technologies where appropriate. There are no restrictions on Ms. Boddy doing her job. She can vote and complete her parliamentary duties in line with our national legislation. As stated, we have never disallowed Ms. Boddy from acquiring a fridge to store breast milk, and her office is private, therefore there is no risk of her privacy being infringed. Apologies. When her seat was being constructed, she was still able to cast her vote from her office. As vote pairing is currently an informal arrangement, there was no obligation on the state to secure one, as it is not currently in our remit. This may change with the findings of the task force. However, we are not currently in a position to discuss that to ensure autonomy and independence of that task force. In summary, Madam Chair and esteemed committee members, The state respectfully submits that we have not, nor are we, in breach of our obligations under Articles 5, 6, 9 and 29. Based on general comments, the jurisprudence of this esteemed committee and our own arguments, we trust that we have proved the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe the amicus is next, yeah? Okay, so I don't have anything on screen in front of me. It's going to come up here now, the team representing the Florin National Human Rights Institution.
Did you hear it?
Namely, CRPD Convention and General Comments, the WHO
Sorry, can
Global
we just,
Report.
sorry, could we ask you to start again? I'm sorry, we missed the introductions.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Unfortunately, I could not turn on my camera. My name is Jeanette, and I'm introducing today the amicus brief on behalf of the Florin Human Rights Commission. My colleagues Yoshiko and Yana will be presenting our statements today based on the Articles 5, 6, 9, and 29 of the CRPD. The Commission has done research to present this amicus brief for the court, and namely CRPD Convention and General Comments, WHO Global Reports on Health Equity for Persons with Disabilities, that brings health equity for persons with disabilities to the attention of decision makers and documents evidence and and makes evidence-based recommendations for the decision makers. And the UNDESA flagship report on disability and development report accelerating the realization of sustainable development goals by, for, and with persons with disabilities. That is recent global analysis based on unprecedented amount of data, and that to understand the socioeconomic circumstances of persons with disabilities worldwide and challenges and barriers they face in their daily lives. And the UNDESA report Disability and Development, realizing the Sustainable Development Goals by, for, and with persons with disabilities, which demonstrates that persons with disabilities are at a disadvantage regarding most sustainable development goals, and CEDAW Convention. From analysis of all these documents, the position of the Commission is as follows. Many of the access requests put forward by Ms. Body can be argued for and on the basis of reasonable accommodation so that Ms. Body can continue to participate in her parliamentary duties. Women and girls with disabilities, multiple discrimination was not taken into account, and positive measures to protect them from multiple discrimination to ensure the full and equal enjoyment of their rights were not taken. And access to the physical environment was not provided to Ms. Body. So reasonable accommodation was not provided to her to give her an ability to vote distantly. And denial of reasonable accommodation is discrimination. I would add only here that Ms. Body is the first woman with disability to be elected to parliament, and the state of Florida could take this opportunity to understand and learn from the lived experiences of an elected member of parliament and to review the accessibility and reasonable accommodation measures currently in place for all elected parliamentarians and parliament employees with disabilities, including those specific to women with disabilities in line with Articles 5, 6, 9, and 29 of the CRPD. My colleagues will cover now specific issues related to articles of the CRPD, and I ask Yoshiko to join the session and to talk.
Thank you, Janet. I'm Yoshiko Miwa. I will present our research on Articles 9 and 29 of UNCRPD in consideration of Ms. Body's case on behalf of the Florida Human Rights Commission. Article 9 of UNCRPD requires the government to enable persons with disabilities to access all aspects of their life on an equal basis with others. Access includes the physical environment, transportation, information, and communications. However, the government of Florida does not provide a proper physical environment. The indoor facilities at the workplace were not arranged so that Ms. Body could enjoy access to bathrooms, menstrual products, and a fridge to carry out breastfeeding. Reasonable accommodation was not provided to her to give her ability to vote distantly. Article 29 requires the government to guarantee persons with disabilities the right to participate. It means that they should be able to have political rights and the opportunity to enjoy them on an equal basis with others. The word participate include voting in public decision making. Though Ms. Body is a member of parliament, her right to vote in the parliament is not fully enjoyed. Florida has a Florida's Equal Opportunities Act, and it is considered that it was enacted until 2010 as enacting necessary domestic acts to ratification. Article 3 in this act defines elimination of discrimination, and paragraph 1 of this article contains a refusal or failure by the provider of a service as discrimination. Though there is no concept of reasonable accommodation, also it allows discrimination on some reasons. The government should be encouraged to amend domestic act to be consistent with UNCRPD. The government also should be encouraged to reflect the concept in the General Comment number 2 on accessibility and General Comment number 6 on equality and non-discrimination. Now I finish my part. Jana will speak about Article 5 and 6 in CRPD and conclude our presentation.
Hello,
Thank you, Yoshiko. I'm Jana, and I will now speak as Yoshiko mentioned. I think my camera is not working, but I will speak now about Articles 5 and 6 of the CRPD. So Article 5 is about equality and non-discrimination, and it states that in order to promote equality and eliminate discrimination, state parties shall take all appropriate steps to ensure that reasonable accommodation is provided. And reasonable accommodation is defined in Article 3 of the CRPD as a necessary and appropriate modification and adjustment, not imposing a disproportionate or undue burden, when needed in a particular case to ensure persons with disabilities the enjoyment and exercise of an equal basis with others of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. And looking at the general comments, and particularly the general comment number 6, from 2018, we found out that this is a two-step approach. So in the first place, you have to look if it's a reasonable accommodation. And there you don't have to take the costs into account. You just have to look at the question if it's reasonable and necessary for the applicant to exercise their rights. And only on the second, in the second part, it's examined if the burden is undue for the state. And we also would like to highlight that this is an ex post duty, so it's not to be confused with the general duty of the state to make buildings and everything else accessible to for persons with disabilities. But this is an ex post approach. And it might also, or it applies also to a specific person asking for their recommendations to be met. So it's okay. It can later on become useful for other disabled persons and people with disabilities as well. But it's okay. Also in the comments, it's stated that it's fine if it's only beneficial for one person. And we also would like to emphasize that the burden of proof, if the accommodation is undue, should lie with the duty bearer, so with the state. And we are a bit concerned if Florence Equal Opportunity Act is taking that into account, because it's a bit shifting the responsibility back to the person with a disability, we think. And also we want to highlight the importance of the non-discrimination and equal rights and opportunities for women and girls with disabilities, because in Article 6, it's in the general comment number 3, it's mentioned that they're underrepresented and there's a general lack of women and girls with disabilities in political life. And also the government maybe didn't take into account here that women and girls are facing multiple discrimination.
That's the end of this team's time. Yes. I'm sorry, that's the end of your time.
Okay, so thank you. We would say overall that there was a breach of Articles 5, 6, 9, and 29. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amicus team. I was actually going to ask a question there, so it perhaps works out. I particularly liked how you explained quite clearly the sort of burden of proof that it is the government that needs to show that that there is an undue burden, and that burden should not switch back. So I'm using burden in two different ways, but that onus, let's say, should not switch back onto the complainant. I wonder if you could actually explain that more using the facts of the case. Does that question clear? Would that be okay?
Yes, I think so. So I think the burden of proof, it's like in the court, usually the person who wants to obtain a right has to prove what they need. And so in this case, I think it's the two-step approach. Ms. Badi, the applicant, just has to prove that the accommodation is reasonable for her. And I think maybe we would like to take the court into account that she has met that, because she explained that she has special needs as a mother, that her disability maybe was more severe after her pregnancy, and that her office was very far away from the chamber. And I think the second part now is the undue burden. So it's the government has to enlighten us on the fact why they are not, because they're countering Ms. Badi's needs, they have to enlighten us on the fact why it's impossible for them to meet them. And I think this part, would like maybe need a little bit more explanation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to the whole amicus team. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm now calling on the applicant's team for rebuttal, and it is 10 minutes? Yep, 10 minutes.
If it's fine, I would just stand here. Just not sure. And if it's okay for you, I would take off the mask because I think it's better to hear me then. Okay. Good morning, Mrs. Chairperson. Good morning, distinguished members of the committee. Good morning, everyone. My name is Deborah Peters, and I am here on behalf of the complainant, Ms. Deborah Badi. Now, the complainant raises 2 points on rebuttal. First of all, by failing to provide Ms. Badi with accessible voting and procedures and facilities, the state violated Article 29 CRPD. And second, the complainant submits that the denial of the request by Ms. Badi constitutes a violation of the right to non-discrimination under Article 5 CRPD. Now, this case is about the fundamental values of equal participation in our democracy. And this committee today has now the opportunity to take down these barriers that specifically target women with disabilities. Now, first, by failing to provide Ms. Badi with accessible voting procedures and facilities, the state violated the Article 29 CRPD. This requires states to promote actively an environment in which persons with disabilities can effectively and fully participate in the conduct of public affairs without discrimination and on an equal basis with others, and encourage their participation in public affairs. In denying Ms. Badi her right, the possibility to vote from home, she had no possibility to vote at all during her maternity leave and when she had to stay home afterwards. As the state said, it has an obligation to the nation with regards to national security. However, it has also an obligation that all of the votes of our voters are also represented in Congress. Now, with regards to the question that it might have been possible for Ms. Badi to obtain a pairing of votes, it is quite intransparent how this pairing of votes functions. So it is an informal procedure, and thereby it is also quite open to discriminatory practices, as you always have to rely on another party member to abstain from voting. So by denying Ms. Badi the access to a vote from home, she was de facto prevented from exercising her parliamentary duties, which is, as I stated before, fundamental for the functioning of our democracy. Furthermore, the state also did not prove that the use of an electronic voting option would constitute a disproportionate or undue burden. Now, for example, in New South Wales, there is the opportunity of iVote, which is an electronic voting system. And A similar approach could have been used for Ms. Badi. Furthermore, the state party is also required under Article 29 to adapt its voting procedures by ensuring that they are appropriate, accessible, and easy to understand and use. Yes, of course.
Those are very good arguments, but the state's fundamental argument is that there's a security reason for not doing that. So can you address that argument that they've made?
Thank you for your question. Yes, so of course there is the security argument. However, as we see our esteemed friends from the Amicus team today here, they are also participating online, and if they were not here, this could also not happen. So we have seen from COVID-19 that, as I stated before, oral hearings are proceeded online. Of course, everybody is always, maybe reluctant to go for such changes. But I think in our globalized community, it is necessary that we adapt to different living conditions. And as I also stated before, what the complainant is asking for is not a vote for every member of parliament to be able to vote from home. However, it has to be possible for a person with disabilities that she can vote from home due to exceptional circumstances. Also, Ms. Badi is not all asking to vote every day and every time from home, just for exceptional circumstances. And with regards to security, furthermore, I would also point to the point that my esteemed colleague has said. So there is also an etiquette for members of parliament. They are obliged to adhere to these etiquettes, and this is a fundamental issue. And that's the reason why the complainant also submits that, we can expect from our members of parliament that they also adhere to these etiquettes. And I would like to come back to my points here. This is especially important with regard to the accessibility point that Ms. Badi has only been elected for 4 years. So she also has only a limited time to present her voters in parliament due to her maternity leave. 9 months, a few months, she was not able to attend the parliament. So this is a quite long time of period that she was denied of her right to represent her voters. So consequently, the complainant submits that the state violated Ms. Badi's rights under Article 29 CRPD. And now turning to the second point, the complainant submits that the denial of the request Ms. Badi made constitutes a violation of the right to non-discrimination under Article 5 CRPD. Now, according to Article 2, as we have already heard, discriminations includes all forms of discrimination, and especially including the denial of reasonable accommodation. Now, Ms. Badi has here filed 2 different requests, and these requests recurred the menstrual products, the accessible bathroom, the seating, as well as the vote from home. However, her requests were either denied, only partly fulfilled, or delayed. Due to this conduct by the state, Ms. Badi cannot exercise her right on an equal basis with others. So in this case, especially with regarding to the fridge, the state has stated that they would pay the fridge for other women. However, the fridge for Ms. Badi is not paid. So this is a conduct which is specifically discriminative against women with disabilities. And even if we assume that maybe a conduct might not explicitly discriminate against women with disability, this committee has also stated that discrimination can result from the discriminatory effect of a rule or measure that is neutral at a face value or without intent to discriminate. However, it disproportionately affects the person with disabilities. So the complainant is not submitting that the state is intentionally discriminating against Ms. Badi. However, the decision on the different requests de facto discriminates against her as a woman with disabilities. She is disproportionately affected by the barriers in the parliament and by the lack of the measures taken by the state. So therefore, the complainant submits that by denying Ms. Badi her request, the states violated Article 5, paragraph 1 CRPD. Now, furthermore, we submit that the state violated Article 5, paragraph 3 CRPD, and by denying her the obligation to provide reasonable accommodation. So, as we have already heard, she has made her case that reasonable accommodation was denied to her. That's why I would just quickly state that reasonable accommodation is an ex nunc duty. As such, reasonable accommodation must be provided from the moment on that the person with disability requires access to a non-accessible situation or environment to exercise his or her rights. And therefore, here in the case, it is that Ms. Badi required the adjustments to make the parliament equally accessible to her. However, the state party failed to meet the requirements. Now, what is crucial to this case is the question of the disproportionate or undue burden, and especially the question with regards to the burden of proof, which is on the state in this case. Now, the conduct by the state can only be justified if the measures that should have been imposed would be disproportionate or an undue burden on the state. However, as already pointed out by your question and by the amicus, the state failed to meet its burden of proof that the requested measures would be a disproportionate or undue burden. So the adjustment that have been made by the state, they do not enable Ms. Badi to fulfill her duties and exercise her rights as a member of parliament on an equal basis with others. And now here the state argued that it would be too complex, it would be too costly, and it would cause especially the issue that the procedures of parliament would be delayed if there were like construction issues. Now, this poses the question, does parliament never function normally when there are construction issues? Or why is there this special fear of delay? However, it is also has to be taken into account that now the state has not provided any argument that the adjustment, such as a special oath before the court, would be not securing the issue of voting from home. And so especially I would like to point out once more that the Section 3, Paragraph 2 of the Florence Equal Opportunities Act indicates already that there is not an individual assessment of each case. So as it is already stating that measures are only are deemed unreasonable if there is a nominal cost, this already indicates that they are not sufficiently establishing in each case whether the costs for the specific measure could be bared or would be reasonable in that regard. So yes, so all in all, this concludes that the state violated Article 5, Paragraph 3 by denying the measures to Ms. Badi. And for each of the foregoing reasons, the complainant respectfully requests the committee to rule that the state of Florin violated Mr. Bora Badi's rights under Article 5, 6, 9, and 29 of the CRPD. And we are happy that Ms. Badi has opened the eyes of the states concerning discrimination against disabled women. However, this is not enough. What we need is immediate action to achieve equal access.
Can I just ask a question with regard to the task force that the state have outlined as their part of their response, and what the views of the applicant are in terms of that as a measure of response?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the state in general, there are like two different kind of obligations with regard to accessibility, or the other is reasonable accommodation. So accessibility needs to be achieved for everyone. So it is not an individual complaint, but a complaint for the group. And reasonable accommodation is when there is an individual request. So with regard to a reasonable accommodation, the state has a rather bigger margin of appreciation with regard to the time question. However, accessibility, especially with regard to fundamental rights, as is the case here, there are more time-pressing considerations which need to be taken into account. So, as I stated, of course, here it is the case that Ms. Badi only has been elected for 4 years. So now we've heard she's already pregnant. I'm not sure which time she started as member of parliament, but the state is obliged to increase the speed of those processes, and it is also obliged, if it is not able to achieve accessibility right now, then at least they have to enable her to vote from home, or at least have to give her other opportunities to exercise her rights.
Okay, I mean, the state would argue that it has given Ms. Badi, not that I want to be doing the state's job for them, but I mean, the 9 months of maternity leave, including an extension, has been provided to her as an accommodation.
Yes, of course, but this is also required. So this is just one of several aspects. Yes, she has been granted this extended maternity leave. However, there are other issues that she has been denied. And this is a very special thing because it is an intersectional violation of her rights, as she is a woman and she is a disabled woman. However, there are many aspects that the state does not grant to her as a disabled woman and a member of parliament. And it's so fundamental that they deprive her of her rights and duties as a member of parliament to represent the voters' choices. So yes, the state did grant extra maternity time for the leave. However, there's no procedure in place. What is in case Ms. Badi is at home and cannot vote in person from the parliament building.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, going to call on the state now for their rebuttal.
I don't know, but it's okay.
So we respectfully hear everything that Ms. Badi's team has stated. However, it's important to note that the wording of this case is very specific. Many times we've been told that we're denying Ms. Badi of her rights, and we can't fully provide everything given the state that we're currently in. There are 4 points that the team has brought up: menstrual products, a refrigerator, voting from home, as well as the seating in the parliament. I'm going to hit on each one of these points and how we've done everything in our power to reasonably accommodate given the situation, specifically due to the fact that this is during COVID-19, a new area in which we have limited funds and limited knowledge. We are allocating many resources to research and providing safe spaces for everyone to still participate. As we read in the facts, Parliament had to change its ways to provide the opportunity to vote in COVID while maintaining safe spaces. And this was one of the many challenges that we've dealt with during this time. So in terms of menstrual products, while there were times that Ms. Badi may not have been able to find these products, there were also many times of which they were available. That happens in everywhere that you may go and see. We run out of things and they just need to be replaced. So within our teams and our staff, we replace them when we see a need. If we don't see that they're empty, well then how are we going to know to replace something that we don't know is run out?
Objection, Your Honor, derogatory language. Wherever you may go and see, if we cannot access the whole building, how can we go and see that those products are provided there? Not easy.
Overruled. Okay. There's dissent from my esteemed colleagues here, but anyway, continue.
You got it.
Secondly, we touch on the fridge. So we talked about having equal access to all opportunities in this building. And while there is a fridge upstairs, we maintain the knowledge that this is an old building. It hasn't been updated yet, and we're currently in the works with our audit of updating the building to change the way in which people are able to access all of these spaces. We've provided the opportunity for Ms. Badi to receive a fridge, and if she were to purchase a fridge, we then take on the responsibility of providing electricity to that fridge. However, based off of the nominal cost, we cannot afford both the fridge and all of the expenses that may come along with it.
Specifically on the fridge and the fact that both of you are meant to be rebutting one another's arguments, what have you got to say about the argument made in rebuttal by the state about indirect discrimination in relation to the fridge? You know, unintentional discrimination, discriminatory effect. It's a really important point.
So you're saying based off of their statement, what?
I'm asking you to address the point that was made by the complainant in rebutting your original argument, and she made the point about discriminatory effect or indirect discrimination or unintentional discrimination. I think that's what you're trying to argue, that's what the state is guilty of. So, you know, we've already had the argument about who pays for the electricity for the fridge and all of that, and the existence of another fridge. But could we please address that argument? It's really fundamental.
So indirect discrimination.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for that stance, there's a bit of a challenge because while Ms. Body might need the fridge for her breast milk, which she has emphasized that she does, we have provided the opportunity for that fridge to come into our building. And so while there may be indirect discrimination, there already is a fridge. While potentially not accessible, Ms. Body could request her breast milk to be taken up to the fridge.
Are you saying that the building is accessible to a fridge but not a person? I mean, I don't really get. I don't get that point about you know, you let the fridge in. Welcome fridge. Like, I mean, you know, there's a serious point though about you know, unintended discrimination. And taking instructions.
Regretting having the microphone.
You can talk.
I believe in you.
I don't know if I okay. I was just going to say that while it may seem like we're indirectly discriminating her, we would do the same for anyone with this issue. Like it's.
So you're saying that you're a non-discriminating indirect discriminator. That you don't distinguish between those against whom you indirectly discriminate.
It's okay. This is difficult. This is difficult. It's okay. It's okay.
I think there's a line that needs. I don't know. I need to stop talking.
Okay, yep. If you want to continue with your own rebuttal, we'll interrupt you again if needs be.
Okay. Remote voting, I think, was one of the biggest things that we discussed here. And there was a mention of something called iVote. However, we need to keep in mind that this case happened 2 years ago, so those technologies might not have been in place at the time that this case was happening. So the world is constantly changing, and we're changing alongside it. However, we don't always have the resources then that we do now. And in terms of security and resorting to Zoom, there are so many ways that Zoom can be breached, as well as any technology. When you put your device onto a Wi-Fi or some sort of service, anyone can hack into that and breach your technology. And that's something that our government is simply not able to risk. We have heard that Ms. Body would be going against her, it would intend that she would be going against her, whatever she signed up to do. However, we're not saying that she's going against what she has decided to do here in Parliament. It's just a matter of security. We've provided the opportunity to vote from the parliamentary offices, but we cannot say the same for at home. It's in our laws that all votes must be held on parliamentary grounds. And that is both for security purposes as well as to maintain an ability to see and count these votes in a professional manner. For seating, we were told that it did take 4 months to put that chair in. We recognize that that was a delay. However, like we've said before, this is during COVID. There's so many things that were unseen, and many delays occurred simply due to the space that we were in and the space we were provided. Resources were limited and being stretched out across the entirety of Florin. We did as much as we could to provide that chair. However, things take time when there's not enough people to create the space.
Can I just ask about the remote voting? Just one thing. You're saying that conditions during COVID, that was then and this is now type of situation in relation to the remote voting. But Ms. Batty's disability is not just going to disappear overnight. Okay? So surely her contention is that her disability remains, her need for voting accommodations remain in certain times where she cannot vote and she's been denied their access to voting if, because of her disability, there are certain occasions where she cannot vote. So can things not be put in place, given that technology moves on? So do pandemics. So technology moves on. Can those things not be investigated then to put in the infrastructure to support her to take place in voting, given that her need for accommodations remains?
They can absolutely be investigated, and that's part of what our task force was about, is that investigating new technologies, creating new technologies. However, we're focusing on what's happening right now. We don't have those technologies yet. We've provided, again, the opportunity to vote from her office at work. However, we don't have the technologies to ensure safe voting from home just yet. We'll absolutely investigate with our task force that's working hard to provide a sense of independence and ability for everyone to vote in a accessible manner. However, in the current place that we're in, we don't have the technology to safely do that.
Again, I'm very keen on the idea of both parties engaging with one another on rebuttal. And the complainant made some very strong arguments about cost and disproportionate burden or undue hardship or whatever the terminology is. And it seems to me that some of the state's position on cost is the kind of argument that might be made by a small business in a private action for discrimination in respect of the cost, but not the argument to be made by a state with deep pockets. I mean, if this committee were to say that states could make those kinds of arguments, it would really enhance the excuse of cost for not making reasonable accommodation. So, can you address that question of scale? Because this is a question of, say, the state's direct responsibility for its parliament, not the state's responsibility for, say, weak laws in respect of smaller entities. This is actually directly engaging the state's obligation, where I think the cost arguments just can't be treated as they might be treated in other contexts.
Absolutely. So in terms of cost, yes, I recognize that we have money. We're the government, so yes, we do have the funds. But in terms of whether or not that's going against the law, it's beyond a nominal cost. So in section 3.2 of Florence Equal Opportunities Act, a refusal or failure to provide the special treatment or facilities to which this act refers shall not be deemed reasonable if such provisions would give rise to a cost other than a nominal cost to the provider of the service in question. So in terms of discrimination purposes, it does not, according to the law, it does not constitute as discrimination because it's beyond a nominal cost. So yes, we do have the money. However, by our law, this would not count and fall under that discrimination.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the UNCRPD standard. We're not here as a committee to supervise the implementation of national laws. We're here to assess national laws. Sorry. We're here to assess national laws and their compatibility with the convention.
I might be wrong because I don't have the convention in front of me. However, I thought that when I was reading, there was also a discussion of nominal cost. Am I correct? I might be incorrect.
I believe the language in the convention would be something around undue burden, which perhaps would be sort of parallel to the national law. And perhaps at this moment, you might explain how it's not only more than a nominal cost for you, but also an undue burden according to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
Well, one of my colleagues did want both parties to debate each other or assist each other, so here we are. Cool. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so all measures.
Why it is an undue burden for the state. Because the law is different. No.
It's okay, take your time.
Yes.
It's undue burden.
Okay, so you made the comment earlier that if we buy a fridge for one person, what prevents us from then having to buy a fridge for another person, put in a fridge for another person? So the undue burden would then fall into, well, now we have to give a fridge to everyone. So it is just a fridge. But at the same time, when we would change that providing the fridge to someone, then it would cause an undue burden on the government to then provide a fridge to every office.
Yes, I think as ridiculous as that argument sometimes sounds, it's surprising how often it's made, even in large university settings. So I think perhaps because many of us here are disability advocates, disability scholars, it's a challenge to make an argument around why something like this would be an undue burden. And perhaps what my fellow judge was referring to in terms of the deep pockets argument as well is that a state does have so much money, right? That even perhaps providing a fridge for everyone would be something that it could actually do. And yet many governments and indeed any kind of institution that is faced with providing reasonable accommodation often makes a similar argument to the one that you have just made, which I think is a good follow-up argument around how, where does that obligation end? And this is where the burden comes into play, is that it's not clear where it would end. So thank you for your follow-up. And I think it's a challenging, area to develop an argument. And yet, as I said before, it would be perhaps surprising to many people how many times just that argument has been made by real governments and institutions around the world. So thank you.
Okay, have you finished the rebuttal you have? Okay. Where are we now in terms of closing statements? Okay, from all three parties. So we will, the amicus has a closing statement of 1 minute as well. We start with they don't have rebuttal. That's the different, okay. Okay, so can I call upon the applicant then for a 1 minute closing statement?
Thanks.
We all heard the state admitting that they do have money, but for some reason, they want to spend that money in paying for the electricity spent by the fridge, not the fridge itself. And at the same time, I wonder, do the state consider the electricity spent by chargers of all the parliament members when they charge 30 phones at once? Now, I want to start by saying iVote was established in 2011, and that precedes COVID-19. And it is in the duty and in the benefit of the state to use all the financial investments that they put in providing Zoom and all the online platforms, including security measures, into using that procedure and that process in a longer time. It will only make value for money in business words. Now, as history tells us, formal equality, we've moved a long time. Because if we use that concept, then only men can vote, and only white men also. We need, the convention applies a human rights model, and the right to vote is a human right established many years ago by pioneers, just like Ms. Buddy, that is doing now. History told us that barriers were put in place by us, human nature, and also removed by us, humans. And in order to allow a human right such as the right to vote, we need the removal. I can't see your time.
Yes. Yeah, it was just 1 minute.
I joke. Thank you.
And closing argument for 1 minute on behalf of the state.
While I appreciate the history lesson from the complainants, we here in the present are in the business of running a nation. We have not breached our obligations. We have proved time and time again, based on our arguments, that history sides with us as a state. We welcome Ms. Baddy's voice and her leadership on the issue. And we look forward to seeing her exercise the rights as given to her by us in Parliament. Thank you.
And the NHRI closing statement.
Well, our colleague did not join us. He was going to make the final concluding. So maybe I can say a couple of words.
Please do.
Thank you very much. I thank you for all these very interesting discussions. And we would only add that reasonable accommodation has as the essential objective the promotion of equality and the elimination of discrimination against persons with disabilities. So, case-by-case approach based on consultations with person concerned is therefore required. So this is to the to what we have been talking about, like fridge for one person or for everyone, and the burden of proof that we have been talking about. In this regard, should rest with the duty bearer who claims that his or her burden would be disproportionate or undue. So while duty bearers must make good faith efforts to provide reasonable accommodation, there might be legal or material financial limits, and any justification of the denial of reasonable accommodation must be based on objective criteria and analysis and communicated to the person with disability concerned. So I would also add, if I have time, that the underrepresentation of women with disabilities in all their diversities and decision-making systems, including in national parliaments, means that specific barriers and concerns affecting parliamentarians with disabilities are less visible to policymakers. And as a result, their rights and specific needs are...
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if I don't believe that we have any further contributions to be made at this time, so the committee will rest and we can have coffee and we will come back with decisions following that. Thank you.